That'll be the sort of full circle. If we get to the point there. All right. Yeah, that's a good way to do it. Preaching. Hello, hello. Thanks everyone for coming out to Prop Store this evening. We are live streaming online now. We're on Prop Store's Facebook. We're also on Prop Store's YouTube channel. So if you're watching us from home, please give us a comment, say hello, let us know that you're out there. I'm Brandon Allinger. I'm the COO of Prop Store, and we have a special guest in the house today. We have Howard Kazanjian, producer of Return of the Jedi and executive producer of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Thank you.
So we're going to do a live stream here for about half an hour. We're going to have a discussion with Howard about his work at Lucasfilm and about some of the toys and merchandise from that time specifically. We're going to open the floor up to questions from anyone who's here in the room or anyone who's watching the live stream who wants to send us a question through the web. And Howard will answer if he's happy to do so, and if not, then we'll move on to the next question. And then when we finish up here, Howard is happy to sign some autographs and take some pictures. And the reason that we're doing this evening is that the next 2 days here at Prop Store are our vintage toys and collectibles live auction. And so we're going to be selling 750 lots of vintage toys. Day one is tomorrow. Thursday will be the all Star Wars day. And then day two is non Star Wars. And on the back half of day two, we have a bit of movie memorabilia. So we have some cast and crew items, we have some production artwork, we have a few props, and some things like that. If you haven't already done so, please go to propstore.com, take a look at the auction catalog. I'll show you one right here. This is the printed version of the catalog. I think we're actually just about sold out of these. We sold quite a few of them. There may be one or two available still here in house, but there's not too many. Fortunately, it is online as a PDF. You can see the whole thing as a PDF, and then you can also go onto the online bidding platform. The bidding platform there where you can see each item as well, and you can see multiple photos and a complete description. If anyone has questions, anyone watching from home, if you have questions about the auction, registration for the auction, anything like that, feel free to reach out to us. We will be available to support via web, via email, and via phone over the next 2 days. And we're going to have a lot of fun selling this content. We've been working on this auction for over a year now. I'd like to give a shout out to Chris Julius and Darren Simpson, who have been working with us as our consultants, putting all this together. Chris is our in-house toy expert here in the U.S., having been collecting for many decades, 2, 3 decades, long time. And Darren Simpson has been working with us over in the U.K., sort of in the same capacity as a longtime collector. He's been helping us vet the content and understand the content. And it's been a lot of fun for us to get back into this world. I was a toy collector many years ago myself. I was a very basic toy collector. I collected loose action figures and things like that. I never got into the more advanced collecting of prototypes and graded figures. I don't think there were graded figures at that time, but I've always loved the content, and I think a lot of people have. A lot of Star Wars fans have. I think for a lot of Star Wars fans, their love of the film kind of goes hand in hand with their memories of those toys. So many great toys, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. Um, so Howard, let's start with you. You knew George Lucas from film school, which I think is pretty interesting. You went to USC in the 1960s. Can you tell us a little bit about when you met George?
George didn't start off in the cinema department. He came over to visit one day, and I was standing there. Nobody else was around. And he said, "Tell me about the cinema department," which I did. Now, back in the day, those who were across the street, across Hoover Boulevard, taking the normal classes, you could come over to the cinema department and take one or two classes as an elective. I suggested that he take Arthur Knight's Room 109, which premiered films that had yet been released. And either the director, producer, or the star of the show would come over and talk to us kids about the film, and we were able to ask them questions. George took that class, and I think from there on, he decided to become a cinema major, and the rest is history.
Now, you got out of USC and you began your career as an assistant director. And you worked on some big films in the 60s, titles like Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman and The Wild Bunch and Finian's Rainbow. And there's another George Lucas related story. We'll sort of stick with this George Lucas Lucasfilm thread because that's why a lot of people are here tonight. It's because of Star Wars. So you introduced George Lucas to Francis Ford Coppola. Is that right?
That is correct. George won the Warner Brothers Scholarship. Warner Brothers gave a scholarship each year to a graduating student at USC. The previous year, it was given to Joyce Geller for 6 months to come and write. Actually, she wrote a screenplay called The Cool Ones, which was actually produced at Warner Brothers. So George one day calls me up and he says, "Hi." And I said, "Hi, how are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I have an office here and there's nothing here but some Warner Brothers stationery and there's nothing for me to do. I want to be a director. I am a director. Can I come down and visit?" Absolutely. Told him where we were in the back lot. We were shooting Finian's Rainbow. Fred Astaire and Petula Clark that very day were doing a dance number. He came down. I introduced him to Francis Coppola. And that evening, as an assistant director, Francis changed his mind a lot for the good. I I'd do a call sheet and I'd say tomorrow morning we need the 22 dancers and we needed Tommy Steele or Petula Clark at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And then Francis would change his mind and say, I don't want to start with the dance. I want to start with something else. And oh, by the way, I need a crane. Well, the only way I could understand what he really wanted was to go to his office at night and sit there and listen to him pontificate. All good stuff, all positive stuff. And George went with me. And that's how Francis not only met George, but could see in George that he was unique and he had a talent. Now, remember, he also had made THX 1138 at USC. And shortly thereafter, George showed Francis that movie, and Francis was impressed. And then George started writing the long theatrical version of THX. And again, I don't want to say that the rest is history, but the rest was history.
And so when did you start working directly with George professionally? Because I know your first credit with Lucasfilm was more American Graffiti, but what was your relationship with George in the early to mid '70s? When did you guys link up professionally?
Well, we always kept in touch. Um, when George did THX 1138, which was his first film, he asked me if I would be come along with him as the assistant director. Well, I had gone through a 2 year training program as an assistant director, and now I had my DGA card, my Directors Guild card, and I couldn't do a non union film. Francis asked me if I would do a non union film with him too, and I couldn't do it. Francis wanted me to quit the guild. A director can quit the guild and do a non union film. And then on his next directorial assignment, he pays the $4,500, the $5,000, and rejoins. But as an assistant director, you quit the guild, you're gone. And back then, you couldn't do a non union film. Today, a DGA member can do a non union film. If you report to the Directors Guild and tell them what it is, you can do it. So I said no to George. George then was going to do American Graffiti. And I said yes. But I was tied up with 1977. I think I was tied up with Robert Wise, the director. I think it was Bob Wise. And couldn't do it because it went, that particular picture, the Hindenburg, went over schedule. And then George asked me to do Star Wars. And I said yes. That was going to be as an associate producer or co producer. And I said yes, but I got tied up with Alfred Hitchcock. Couldn't do it. And you don't say no to George because it's no forever. And then George asked me to go to lunch, and he said, I have to do the sequel to American Graffiti. What do you think about that? And I said, I think it's a good idea. He said, normally I wouldn't do it, but if I don't do it, and he starts talking about if we don't do it, the studio will do it without me. And so I signed on to do more American Graffiti, and the rest is history.
Now, one of the interesting things about Lucasfilm at that time and more of American Graffiti is George was essentially developing that project at the same time as The Empire Strikes Back, right? So you were all operating out of the same offices here in LA, and more American Graffiti was moving forward, and the sequel to Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, was also moving forward. So you were actually privy to, party to a lot of the early Empire production meetings as well that were going on, right?
Yes, I was also vice president of production for Lucasfilm, overseeing all their properties. And George had said to me shortly after I joined the company, and I joined before the release of Star Wars, that Howard, pay attention on be at every meeting for the Empire Strikes Back because you're going to be producing the third one, Return of the Jedi. Gary Kurtz will not be doing it. So I was there for every meeting. Most of them were in Los Angeles in our Universal City Studios offices. Eventually, we moved across the street in what we call the Egg Company. But we were developing more American Graffiti, The Empire Strikes Back, Radioland Murders, and a secret project was way off in the distance. Anybody know what the secret project was? Raiders. Again, they didn't have titles, but the secret project was an adventure film.
And so I assume all the films that you had worked on previously as an assistant director, toys and merchandise were really not a part of those in any way, right?
Very little.
And so what do you remember as your first exposure to the idea that toys are a part of this? I mean, do you remember George sitting and talking about the toys in early meetings, or we need to be aware of the toys? Do you remember the toy people coming into the Lucasfilm offices, like Kenner folks?
Well, I'm going to go way back. I remember Roy Rogers and having met him and Dale Evans and going out to their museum, which was in Apple Valley, the first one, and seeing all of his merchandising and toys. And he was the king of merchandising up until the time of George Lucas. He had over 250 different items. Hopalong Cassidy had merchandising. So I was familiar with it to a certain extent. But to answer your question, Brendan, yeah, at that time, with the release of Star Wars and the preparation of The Empire Strikes Back, the company grew. We hired a president, a vice president, a controller, a treasurer, and some of the people that had worked with George on on Star Wars. One became head of merchandising. No, that was a new person that became head of merchandising. Carol Titleman took over the book division. And so everything started to be chopped up into different divisions. We all had our various jobs. We had uh, Sid Ganis, who was doing the marketing, and on and on. It became down in Los Angeles. We had 73 employees at one time, and when we moved up north, at one time, I'll talk about ILM for a minute. When we were doing Empire and the Return of the Jedi and other non Lucasfilm visual effects films, we had about 110 employees. About 10, 15 years later, they grew to nearly 1,000. And those 1,000 would come and go whenever they needed the work. But Lucasfilm grew very, very rapidly. And I don't know that I'm answering your question.
Well, I guess what do you remember as some of the early discussions around toys? For example, do you ever remember being in a story meeting for The Empire Strikes Back where someone brought up a toy or said this would be a great toy? I mean, do you think that was actively on George's mind or on any of your minds, or did that come later?
I think George understood merchandising better than anyone else, even better than his employees, but he wasn't open about it. I think it was all in his head, and he quietly, well, we had Joe Johnson and Ralph McQuarrie, and we had some great artists that were designing props and sets. And George and I would go in every couple of days and we'd look and see what, let's say, Joe Johnson had done. And George would look at it and say, mm, put wings on this. And then he'd come back and either say, I don't like it. Let's go on to something else. I think George was keenly aware of merchandising at that time. And the rest of us knew there was merchandising, but I don't remember ever saying that would be a great item to merchandise. It was just automatic. We knew what we knew that we were going to have a lot of merchandising and they were going to come from the characters and the sets. But really, I got to be honest with you, I really never thought about it and said that would be fabulous.
So the focus was on making the film first. The film was the product, and then the toys followed.
Yeah, on that film. Later on, we start thinking about merchandising, and I think
So talk about that. I mean, was there a shift on Jedi? The Ewoks, were they merchandise
yeah, they were.
centric?
Yeah, we had Ewoks and Yesums that were supposed to be big items. And I'll jump ahead. I think 10 years later, when George did episode one, two, and three, merchandising came first, and then the story. That's my humble opinion.
But I think economically, I mean, the revenues that come off of the merchandising and all the products, I mean, they outweigh the box office of the picture,
They
right?
did. Yeah, I mean, they broke all records, as you know. They were either one, two, three, four worldwide grosses, but merchandising far excelled box office, as you know. I mean, you know what George is worth, and you know what the films did at the box office.
And do you remember, were you personally ever involved in meetings with any of the licensing folks, any of the licensees, Kenner Toys, or any of those other companies that were
Yeah,
doing
those
products?
those people came in. I never went back to Kenner, or we were too busy to go places, but they would ask in advance. You see, they didn't see the script. No one saw the script. No one saw the characters. No one saw the conceptual designs. No one saw the props. We wouldn't let any company see anything, but we would have to tell them that there was a Yesm or there was an Ewok, and it was a furry little animal. And then once we finished the picture, we would send them an illustration of Jabba the Hutt, and then we would send them a three-dimensional digital image of Jabba the Hutt, and then they would make a Jabba the Hutt and send it back to me, and I'd look at the color and say, the color, it's too brown. You need to go a little bit more yellow, because they were only going off of a picture or a description. Now, if you had a stormtrooper, that's easy. They've already seen the stormtrooper, and you say, well, we've made some changes. On occasion, we would give them the pictures of the emperor's guards in the red costumes. But overall, it takes a toy company 8 months to a year to develop and manufacture a toy. So the pressure was on Kenner and the plush people and the bedspread people and all of that to really get their act together and do it at the very last minute. Also, if it was a game, I would send them pictures from not the set. No one could see a picture from the actual shooting set, but we would make small miniature sets that the art department would make, and George and I, and sometimes the directors, would look at it and figure out how we were going to stage those particular scenes. And on occasion, we'd look at it and say, it's too expensive. Remove this wall or remove this corridor. all from small. I wish we had those. I've told Brendan many times. Some of them were sent back to Kenner and the game manufacturers, and the rest I destroyed because we
Tragically,
had to.
tragically.
You know, when we finished the three pictures in London, I couldn't find a museum that wanted the X-wing or the Millennium Falcon. So I have pictures in the back lot at L Street Studios of them being smashed and burned. And I stood there and waited until for sure they were gone so no one would go up there and steal a part other than myself.
So in the auction this week, we have close to 100 lots that are from your collection, toys, pieces of merchandise, a lot of Kenner toys. If you're looking at the catalog, they're all identified in the title as being from the Kazanjian Collection. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you wind up with so many of these different pieces of merchandise?
Well, I was put on the list where I got every toy manufactured in the United States. Um, some of the other employees got the same. George got six of everything, including the toys made in Japan. We rarely saw the Japanese toys. George would see them, but we didn't. And oftentimes, as I said, like with Jabba, they would send me a sample of it. Is the color right? I'll tell you another quick story. As you all know, we started off with on the third picture, Revenge of the Jedi. So one day, Kenner sends me a sample of a toy, and on it it said Revenge of the Jedi. And I said, "We're changing the name." I don't want to tell the rest of the story. So I told Kenner, "Destroy them all." I should have said, "We're going to destroy them all, send them all to me, and we'll destroy them."
But a lot of those are out there. There's a lot of Revenge of the Jedi action figure proof cards that are out there. Who has a Revenge of the Jedi proof card? Someone in this room. Yeah. Most people in this room. Yes. So they definitely survived. Everyone knew, and I think that's the thing about this all of these collectibles is people understood at the time, people who were working with them, that they were interesting. And that's why, yes, a lot of stuff went in the dumpster, but some things got kept as mementos and souvenirs, and that's how things make their way into collections today. Many of the items in the auction are production toys. They were actively sold at stores, but we do have some pre-production material as well. Things like those proof cards. I think we may actually have one or two Revenge of the Jedi proof cards in the auction, and store displays, things that weren't really intended to be collectibles, but were all part of the whole thing, which now are almost more interesting because they weren't designed as a product. They were designed as sort of a support product or a byproduct.
Well, Brendan, I also have a few, I think you've seen them, action figures that came in a box from Kenner for me to open and say, yeah, it looks okay.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So let's move on. I've got a couple of questions from folks who sent in advanced questions here, things people wanted to ask you. Let's see. What's a good one here? Did you ever display any of the toys in your home or in your office?
Yes.
Now, most of the content that's in the auction that came from you is sort of toys in their package, things like that. I believe you also had a whole batch of toys that went to your kids that were probably well played and well loved, right?
Yeah, most of the early Star Wars action figures and toys, smaller toys, went to my three boys, which were, 2 years old, 3 years old, 1 years old. And you can imagine what happened to those. I remember going to Mark Hamill's house and Nathan was playing with action figures. I've never seen so many action figures spread out on the floor, but we didn't think, I should have bought some other toy for my kid at the store and selfishly kept those. But but they had fun and I had fun and I don't regret it. So what?
Toys are to be played with.
Yeah.
and collected. Another question we have here: what product did you consider to be the most absurd?
The most absurd product. Gee, I'd have to think about that one. Let's pass on that.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back to most absurd. We've got to give time to
Well, we
consider
can
that.
ask the audience, but I don't know.
The C3PO tape dispenser comes to mind. Slightly absurd.
I love it. I almost didn't give it to you because it's so absurd. And you put that on your desk and people are going to talk about it.
The conversation pieces. That's right. Another question is not about Star Wars. It's about Indiana Jones. The question is, did you also get copies of the Indiana Jones toys? Because I don't think we have any in the auction.
Yeah, I did. I got there weren't a lot of toys, but I got every Indiana toy or game or whatever was produced. Blankets, sleeping bags.
So if you're an indie fan, tune in for auction two, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Were you involved with the approval process? I think we've covered that one a bit. There's a question. Some people have seen products that went to the Lucasfilm offices that were specifically addressed to George Lucas. Do you think those were intended to go to him personally, or was any product that was coming into Lucasfilm simply labeled for George Lucas?
You're talking about the stuff from Kenner and
So,
whatnot.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it would come in, and we had a warehouse in the beginning, about larger than this room, but taller, and that's where all the comic books were put, and there were a lot of school supplies, binders, three ring binders, and spiral binders, and rulers, and pencils, and erasers, and stuff like that. And I used to take a lot of those, keep them on my desk, and give those out to kids. I didn't give them out toys. I gave them out educational material. But all of that stuff, other than the six that went straight to George's barn out at the ranch, everything came in to our warehouse, and I could walk through it and take basically whatever I wanted. And I don't know why I didn't. You
Uh,
know, it's hindsight, and I probably wouldn't have taken it today either.
so, how about in the room? Anyone who's come out this evening that would like to ask a specific question? Yes, sir.
Because of this man here, yes, and that's happening right now.
I've been telling Howard for years he's got to do his book. He's got to tell his stories. You guys have heard a couple of them tonight. I've been fortunate to know Howard for a while, so I've heard a lot of his stories, and I've been saying, got to get some of this down on paper and get it out in print and into the world. And hopefully that's going to be happening in the near future here.
No dirt in it. You know, to sell a book, you need you need dirt in it. You need something terrible. Fortunately, I don't have that much to tell. Partly because I was so young and naive, I didn't know what was happening. But uh, there was I have a habit even to this day when I if I go to see an actor in his or her dressing room, I knock on the door and open the door. That's all I'm going to tell you tonight.
Good stories to come. Question at the back here.
See, there were so many wonderful, memorable moments, um, when something good happened or it was going in the wrong direction, and you have somebody like my part of my job was if something went wrong, you have to fix it, and you fix it fast, and you stay calm and cool. George is a genius. He thinks out of the box. He knows the story better than any of us. and he can immediately change and go in a different direction. I don't have any particular good story or bad story. Um, I mean, crazy things happen. One day, Darth Vader walked on the set and his robe was only to his knees. Now, how did that happen? I walked on the Star Destroyer and there were flashing red lights all over the walls. How did that happen? Well, the cameraman, he didn't understand or he never had seen the first two pictures. You have to keep your eyes open. There are times where a shot is missed or the director forgets something. And I could tell you those stories, but they would go on all night. All of them are really positive.
Matt, we have a couple people online who wanted to ask a question.
I'm going to combine two questions here. First question for both of you guys, actually. What is your favorite piece in the auction? And Howard, what's going to be the hardest piece to let go?
You know, it's like selling your home that you've lived in for 30 years and you love it and you're moving to a new home and you have to put it out of your mind. You have to move on. And and everything you see here that is mine or was mine, let it go. Let somebody else enjoy it. And I truly mean that. Um, I have one or two objects that you know about that I haven't let go. But those are real props. And one was a gift from George when I left. That would be hard to give away. But you again, you get to a point where you just make up your mind and you do it. Move on.
And I think we've talked a bit about this during the process. One of the fun things about putting the auction together for us as the auction company, the auction house, is you get to see things get their next lease in life, where they move on to somebody who's truly excited about it. And so, where you may have had it for 30 plus years, you've got a certain amount of enjoyment out of it. Now it's going to move on to someone for whom it will be a brand new item in their collection. And they're going to be really jazzed to have this thing and to put it on display and to talk about it and to talk about the history and where they got it. And I think that's all part of this sort of collecting journey and part of what drives collectors. And many collectors at some point during their collecting lifespan will let pieces go. I mean, it's part of the process. Your collection evolves. You get a new focus, you get interested in a different thing, and your collection sort of morphs over time. So I think there's a lot of us who have that sort of bug within us that says, I want to have cool things, but at the same time, you're happy when you let something go that it's going to a new home who's going to cherish it as much as you did, and that's a really positive thing, right?
Right. Well, there's one object, and I'm not going to say what it was, but Brendan was after me for several years, and he has it.
More than 10 years of knocking on your door
And,
about
and
finding
that
that
was
question.
hard to let go, very hard to let go. And I still think about it. But of all the people that will take care of it and cherish it and really believe in Star Wars and is a huge fan, he's the one that should have it.
Well, thank you. So let me answer my part of the question. I would say that there's a lot of great stuff in this auction. One that really stands out to me that I've just always had a thing for is the Star Wars 21 back Boba Fett. And the reason that I like that toy is because it's sort of the introduction of that character, right? Boba Fett was rolled out in the Star Wars Holiday Special in the cartoon, and then almost immediately after it turned up as an action figure, and it's the only action figure on the Star Wars packaging, meaning the first movie packaging that is not in the movie Star Wars. Didn't come out until The Empire Strikes Back. So it's basically revealed as a toy on the Star Wars card back, even though it didn't turn up until Empire. So I love that one. I think we have one of yours in the auction, the 21 back Boba Fett, and for me that's a cool one.
You know where Boba Fett came from and why? After Star Wars, Darth Vader would make appearances, not, you know, somebody we'd hire, somebody that was tall and skinny and wouldn't talk. Darth Vader never talks. Would go out at certain book signings or very special occasions And George got to a point where he said, I don't want Darth Vader going out there. It diminishes his true identity. Let's create another character that can go out on the road. And that's where Boba Fett came from.
And I think Boba Fett's first, one of the other first appearances is on the road. It's in a parade or something in San Anselmo around 78 or 79 before Empire came out.
Yep. And then he was incorporated into Empire.
Any other questions in the room? Anybody else with a question? Yep, Brian.
So we've heard about George's entrance into the entertainment business, but what was your inspiration for getting into the entertainment?
I always wanted to be in the business. My parents gave me their 8 millimeter, not Super 8 millimeter camera, wind up 50 feet uh, spools, when I was about 11 years old to play with. And that really did it for me. And the rest is history. No, I've always wanted to do it. I mean, it was in my blood. I don't know what else I could do. I don't know what else I'd want to do. It's exciting. I like the idea, especially in a film like Raiders and Star Wars as well, to be able to create an atmosphere. It's real easy to shoot a present day movie where we go out on this highway here and shoot cars racing by or an insert of a stop sign. But it's real difficult to create a Western or an Indiana Jones where you have horses and wagons and you have to be very exacting as to the period. And that's a lot of fun. That's very creative. That's what I enjoy most. And I think that goes back to the time when I had this camera and started to create older looking movies.
Good question. Any other questions in the room? Yep.
So kind of keeping on track with that, something I think we share in common with that filmmaking up because I'm Armenian too. So did your parents or family ever have pressure for you to be a doctor or attorney or career that you kind of fall into?
At the time, if somebody wanted to go into the movie business and be a filmmaker and go to USC Film School, where the tuition was, well, not like it is today, but it was expensive back then too for what we all were earning. You had to be crazy to major in film. So, yeah, my parents were disappointed, but extremely supportive. And you know what I mean.
Any other questions online?
Yeah, I've got one just now from Aaron, who, by the way, is bidding on some of your items. So shout out to Aaron.
Good luck, Aaron.
Yeah, what was your favorite moment during the filming of Jedi?
There are so many favorite moments filming Jedi. You know, if I had 10 minutes to think about that question, I might be able to give you an answer. My favorite moment, probably the last shot of the day. No, I just there's so many good, wonderful moments where you creatively came in with a thought. I'll tell you one, and I don't want to tap myself on the shoulder, but I said to George, we were shooting Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi in that ghost effect at the end of the picture that they appear at the Ewok village. And I said to George, what about Darth Vader? He didn't say anything. And the next day, and this is how George works, he doesn't say, no, you're crazy, or yes, that's a wonderful idea on any suggestion I made. And the next morning, he said, get Darth Vader ready. We'll shoot him. And I said, well, I'm not going to tell the rest of the story. But I had changed my mind. I said, George, this is an evil guy. This is like a Hitler. He's willing to kill his children, and he's chopped his son's arm off. And I said, I think that's a bad idea. And George said, Isn't that what your religion is all about? Think about that. And so we shot Darth Vader. And well, there was something that you know, I thought of, and he's in the movie because of that.
And was it also your suggestion to 25 years later replace him with Hayden Christensen as the young Darth Vader?
No, and it wasn't my idea to make some changes in those three pictures 25 years later, or when he did a reissue. I think improving the Death Star exploding or something like that is okay, or cleaning up a bad match shot. I have no comment.
Yes, sir. Here in the front.
During your production at Raiders of the Lost Ark, I heard that there was like a lot of like production problems. What was the biggest challenge you faced during that production?
We'll talk about a couple things. One, on the three Star Warses, the 4, 5, and 6, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, we were in London for most of it. And back then, on my desk were four telephones. One telephone, you could talk to the back lot. Another telephone, you could talk in London. The third telephone, you could call the United States in. The fourth telephone didn't work. But we had no internet, we had no faxes. To make a phone call at 4 p.m. in London to call ILM to coordinate something, it's 9 a.m. in LA. Now on Raiders, we're shooting in Hawaii or we're setting up in Hawaii. That's another 3 hours. So I'm making a phone call 3 hours. It's difficult. Again, no internet, no faxes, and basically no telephone. And when you get into North Africa on the Star Wars pictures, it's very difficult to communicate. Even walkie cell phones didn't exist. Walkie talkies didn't work like they do today. Those were the challenges. Transportation, illness, shooting in North Africa. Even the Tunisians were getting sick. And to keep your cast happy, the trying to get the right food to them and crew, it's a challenge.
I think it is hard to even imagine the logistics of an operation the size of making a movie without cell phones. Today, everyone's life is so tied to their cell phone. You're texting 18 times a day with 50 different people. You're in touch with everyone in every part of the globe, and then it's like, I got a text, I got a Facebook message, I got this on Instagram, ding, 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 call. I mean, everyone is just so very, very connected. But at that time, completely different thing, right? I mean, you probably went long stretches of time without hearing from anybody. I mean, you could just fall out of touch with people.
That's true. And we were building a set in Buttercup Valley, which is on the California Arizona border. That's the Borge. Mickey Herman was in Northern California preparing the Ewoks. The Northern California Ewok scenes we prepared 1 year in advance and moved 13,000 ferns, picking up the rocks and making the paths that the Ewoks would run on because otherwise they'd fall. Every time we tested them, they'd fall right over their flat on their face. And then we let the rains come and everything grew back. So we had construction in two different places. We had ILM. We were shooting in La Rochelle, France. We were shooting in Hawaii. We were shooting in London. We were shooting in North Africa. And when we moved the company, or we moved prior to moving the company, we moved our equipment and cameras and all from London to North Africa. Guess what? You go to France to take a boat to North Africa. Well, there was a strike. So we had to go all the way around the Mediterranean to get to North Africa. And it's hot and it's tough and there's sickness. But we loved it. But there's those are the challenges. But you have to put it behind you and say, okay, nah, one day the crane broke down going down some stairs in North Africa. And Stephen wanted the crane. Says, Stephen, we just broke the axle. Right then, he didn't say anything. He said, okay, well, this is the way we're going to shoot it. And that's how the big Arab thing came about. Stephen was not feeling well. Oh, that's another one.
Any more online questions, Matt? Kirsten, fire away.
Hi. So, I was wondering, do you have a memory? It doesn't have to be a favorite memory. That you have of Carrie Fisher.
Do I have
Do you have do you have a favorite memory with Carrie Fisher?
No, she was a sweetheart. I have a couple pictures of her. Um, no particular memory that I want to talk about. No, she was a doll. She was very professional. She was there. She was in makeup. Uh, she put on that costume that was, and she was great. I loved her. She was a sweet girl, a talented girl from a great family. You know, we miss her.
Another online question.
Yeah, got one more from Paul. Wondering, how to phrase this? When Kenner started taking off, when the figures started taking off, what was the feeling like in the office? Was it a slow burn, or was it just one day you realized these are a hit, these action figures are a hit?
I'm not sure that we all knew. Let me put it this way. Um, After Star Wars, and we brought on a vice president of merchandising, any of the numbers that were coming in were really kept between probably myself, because I'd asked George, and George. The company really didn't, the employees didn't know what kind of money was coming in. We knew that we were selling, very well, but we weren't even told if we were selling 10,000 or 100,000 of a certain item. We knew that the demand was great for many items, and maybe Sears would only get the AT-AT and nobody else. But financially, I think George and his inner sanctum were the only people that knew what kind of money was being made.
Any other questions in the room? A couple more. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, keep in mind, I was vice president of production of all of the films, of the making of, and watching. And Empire Strikes Back ran into a problem. It was going over budget and over schedule. Over schedule meaning so many days over schedule. And this was George's money. And they needed somebody to come in and take over. So I flew to London. We finished the last 2 or 3 weeks of shooting. And then I came back and I looked at the budget and I totally made a new budget. Now we knew what we had spent already in production. Now I knew what I could spend, what was going to be spent in ILM. So I redid the numbers and I said, this is what the picture's going to cost. And because part of it was financed by a bank, I had to assure the bank every day that we were on schedule, on budget. And that happened for about a week. And finally, Charlie Weber, who was the president of our company, he took over and reported to the bank. But that part of the picture was easy for anyone to budget because you knew where you were today, how much you spent, and you knew when you were going to release the picture, and you just figure out what everything else is going to cost, right down to negative cutting, and all of post. So,
And you
so
did
I,
go to England, right? You went to
oh
England
yeah, I
for
went.
shooting.
Well, I
Yeah.
had gone to England earlier on Empire Strikes Back, and then finished up in England. And then at ILM, we did some shooting to weave into the visual effects shots, and I was there throughout post production, preparing other pictures as well. Um, I don't want to talk about Gary Kurtz. I like Gary Kurtz. He was a fine producer. He worked for George for on a number of pictures, but a mistake was made, and it went way over budget. went way over budget. So I was uncredited. I should have put my name on it. If you look at the re-releases, on the re-releases, there's other producers' names on it because they went back and re-released the picture and cleaned up some of the matte shots, and that's why I'm uncredited. But I guess the industry, I didn't pick up the phone and call IMDb and say I'm uncredited. I don't know how that got there, but it's true. And if there's something that bothers me about it, that bothers me. Now, didn't expect to share producer credit with Gary, but something should have been said. Something should have been written. You're getting me off on a tangent. That's behind us, guys. Let's move forward.
Chris, did you have a question?
Yes. It was a very expensive set. And Louis Friedman was in charge of that set. And he was down there for months and months and months. I remember him telling me the first shipment of 12 by 12 by 30-foot beams cost $100,000. And I remember him telling me that the first shipment, not there were more shipments. The first shipment of nails was 11,000 pounds. Okay, had been there many times. We shot there, and now we're finished. And what is this going to cost me? And how long is it going to take this down? So we made a deal with a company and we said, we'll give you X amount of dollars, which wasn't very much. You guys are going to be bidding more than that here. X amount of dollars. It's all yours. You use the plywood, you use the beams, it's all yours. If they didn't take everything, then they buried it in the sand. But I got to tell you something. You could have this camera, I guess this is, sitting there, and tomorrow morning it'd be half buried. If you recall the set from the Sarlacc pit in the ground, below ground, to the top of the sail when it's raised was 210 feet. There was a huge platform where the sand, which was the top deck supposedly, with the barge floating above it. Every morning there was no sand on that deck. It was huge, a huge deck. And then we had to bring sand up in the morning, started early in the morning once it got light, and covered this deck, this huge half football field, with sand. Tomorrow morning, it was gone. The sand dunes change all the time. I mean, you can read about that. And I can't answer what was, this guy probably knows what was left there. Brendan's been to all the locations. I'll say all the locations of the Star Wars films and the Indiana Jones films.
I've been to a bunch of them. There's other people as well. Chris, you've been to a bunch of them. Probably a few of the other guys also. Certainly, many people watching this online may have been out there, and people enjoy seeing those sites because it's a way to connect with the film. Just in the way that collecting is, it's you go out and you see these locations, and it sort of gives you a deeper appreciation for what they went through to make the film, and also you feel a little bit like you're on Tatooine, which
A
is
couple
which is
years
fine.
ago, Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments, the first one, which was shot down there, some of the props start showing coming up.
Yeah, there's a good story about that, digging up major set pieces, big Egyptian statues and hieroglyphs and things on that beach. Um, we're going to have to wind down in a couple minutes here. There won't be any time for autographs, but I'm going to ask you to tell one more related story to Buried Treasure, which is about the chicken walker. So the chicken walker, you built a full-size prop up there. It was installed in the redwoods. It was used up there, and then you wanted to save it, correct?
Yeah, I asked George, I said, why don't we save this and bring this back to the ranch? And he said, okay, you bring it back. And we had a art director. Norman Reynolds was a production designer and a terrific production designer, one of the best I've ever worked with. And he would come back and forth from London to Buttercup Valley and to the Redwood Forest and supervise the local art director. Well, I asked him to take the thing apart and bring it down to the ranch.
And were you going to build it on the ranch?
Yeah, we were going to reinstall it on the
That
ranch.
would have been cool.
And he had his men take a torch and just cut it in pieces and ship it to the ranch. And when it got to the ranch, the man who was in charge of the building of the ranch said, "There's no way we can put it back together." So George said, "Take it out and bury it somewhere on the ranch." And he's the only guy that knows where it's at. I
But
don't
it's
know
still
where it's
there.
at.
Buried
It's probably
treasure
still
somewhere on
there.
Skywalker Ranch is the chicken
Yeah.
walker from Jedi. Very cool. And any final questions before we wrap up here?
And 100 years from now, somebody's going to go and find the chicken walker, just
Maybe
like
sooner than
Indiana
that.
Jones. Ben Burt was in the bunker. Mark One, I love Mark One. He died so early. He was in the chicken walker, I think, as was Robert Watts. I was too busy working to appear anywhere.
But did you do a voice? Are you in there as a voice?
Yeah, I have
somewhere?
it in the at the end in the Death Star tunnel. I'm one of the pilots.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I want to thank the folks at home who have followed our live stream on Facebook, on social media, and on YouTube. Howard's going to stick around for a bit and sign some autographs. Happy to chat with folks for a little bit here this evening. If you are planning to attend the auction, it starts at 11 a.m. tomorrow, the Pacific time, 11 a.m. here at the Prop Store office in Valencia. All the information's on our website, propstore.com. If you want to bid and register and you can't come out in person tomorrow, you can also sign up for phone bidding. There's a phone bidding registration form, or you can bid through the online bidding platform. All the information should be there on the website, but if there's any questions and any uncertainty, just reach out to us. We'll be happy to take you through it. And we're going to have a fun couple of days selling about 750 lots of vintage toys and collectibles. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.